Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday live stream. We're this evening going to be continuing on from our retreat, which Ajahn Nisabho and I led last weekend. We were at Cloud Mountain Retreat Center in Southern Washington, and we were teaching on the five khandhas, the five aggregates of being, and talking about and suggesting ways to make them from being burdens to being blessings. So that was the whole gist of the retreat. And we got a lot of questions, especially the second day. So we thought this is the questions. And we thought to just, rather than try to force them all into the final Q&A period, to expand things and just go into them tonight. And
it was a fun retreat, Ajahn.
Yeah, it was a nice retreat.
About
45, 50 people.
Yeah, we moved to Seattle without realizing our name would be almost the same as Cloud Mountain, so they've been very gracious about forwarding emails to us, and likewise. So,
yeah. Well, before we go into this, Ajahn, would you want to talk about the five aggregates, or at least say what they are? People might not everyone might know.
Yeah, thank you. So we have the five khandhas, as they're translated in Pali, and these are the kind of focal points of identity that the Buddha laid out, namely rūpa, which is the body, form, vedana, feeling, saññā, perception or cognition, I believe Plantain translates it as, saṅkhārā, which is mental formations or mental activity, and viññāṇa, sense consciousness. So that might sound a bit esoteric, but basically, these are the things that we take as me and mine, and they were the subject of the second of the Buddhist seminal discourses, the Pheṇa Sutta, and issued the first five Arahants into full awakening. So they're a deeply powerful framework to look at. Do you mind if I talk a little more? Then I'll give it to you, and we can kind of flesh things out a little. The five aggregates generally are used by the Buddha to uproot delusion, avijja, whereas the six sense bases are often used to uproot lust or craving. And the Buddha used this beautiful analogy to point to the insubstantiality of each aggregate, where he said form is like a sort of piece of flotsam or foam floating down a river. So it looks solid, but it's just made of a bunch of insubstantial bubbles. Just like the body looks solid and cohesive, but really just a constituent or amalgamation of bones, nails, teeth, blood, skin, etc. Vedana, the Buddha compared to the bubble of water that forms on the surface of water after it's hit by a raindrop. So I think of this often as when a sense impression hits us, it's the response of the citta in terms of pleasant, painful, or neutral. Just like when a water droplet hits the surface of water, there's that responding water bubble that comes up from the surface of the water. Saññā, the Buddha compared to a mirage. So perception, these labels we apply to anything we see, hear, etc., enemy, friend, or this or that person. And they seem substantial, solid, and yet just as when you're driving down the road or the freeway and see a distant kind of glimmer that looks like a pond, but it's just the heat or light reflecting off the asphalt. Similarly, saññā is just insubstantial. Saṅkhārā, mental formations, which is the most complicated of them all. It's both the act of creating, the act of concocting, the impulse to concoct, and the concoction itself. So it's the programs we run, and it sort of constellates all the other aggregates into these programs. So you see your boss, you're afraid. Saññā comes in and labels it an enemy. Then the memory comes up, which is another saṅkhārā of a previous interaction you had with them, feeling unpleasant. The body knots up and you get a knot of fear in your stomach. And this is all a constellation, a program that begins to run on saṅkhārā. And the Buddha compared saṅkhārā to a banana tree. And banana trees, they basically look solid, but if you cut them open, it's just leaf after leaf in various sheaths. There's no center wood, so there's no center of saṅkhārā. It's just layer after layer. And similarly, once you dismantle those constellations, there's nothing really substantial in them. And then finally, viññāṇa consciousness is our ability to cognize basically any sense impression. And the Buddha said that the first four of rūpa, form, vedana, feeling, saññā, perception, and saṅkhārā, mental formations, are the building blocks of experience. And that fifth viññāṇa is what knows these four. So the first four are nama rūpa, mentality, materiality, rūpa, form, and the other three nama. And the Buddha said nama rūpa and viññāṇa, sense consciousness, lean against one another like two bundles of reeds. So they are mutually supportive. Viññāṇa knows these building blocks of experience and they support it as it supports them. So if we see through these, we can let go of our grasping to them and realize a freedom of anupadana, non-grasping beyond. That was a long explanation, Ajahn, but how would you kind of chime in terms of, we talked about this distinction between upadana and samadana. Would you add anything to kind of how we frame the aggregates in general?
Yeah, no, that was great. And I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but the metaphor for consciousness is like is it a conjurer's trick at a crossroads? Is that?
So we're good. I was just checking the audio. Sorry, all. We're trying a new program. Carry on, Ajahn. Sorry.
I believe it is. It's a conjurer's trick, possibly at a crossroads, possibly not. It was also in the Buddha's first discourse, the discourse on setting in motion the wheel of Dhamma. The Buddha summarized the first noble truth of dukkha as being the 5 aggregates that are clung to and when they're clung to. So this term to cling, attachment, clinging, is upadana. The root is ada, which is the opposite of dana. So dana is to give, ada is to take or to hold. And so in the case of upadana, it's clinging, that which is holding upa, it's holding it really, really tight. Whereas there's another word which has that same root, ada, and means to hold in a healthy way. So you can samadana your precepts. Like when we take the 5 precepts, you say, I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature, etc. That's veramani sikappadang samadhyami. Samadhyami, samadhyati is the verb form of samadana. So rather than holding too tight, we are samadana. We're holding just right. We're holding precepts, holding our meditation subject, holding our intention to be generous people, etc. And then that is still a type of holding. And so there does come a point, and it's healthy to figure out the flavor of this as early as possible, of just non-clinging, anadana, or anupadana. So yeah, even if we've gone from khandhas as burden, from this relating to the 5 aggregates as with clinging and attachment, we've stopped doing that, or at least want to stop doing that, and started holding to the aggregates in a healthier way. But that can also be problematic if we hold too tight. So just learning how to let go, and our meditation object isn't always going to do what we want it to do. Even if we keep precepts, we hold to the precepts, we samadana precepts. Still, if we hold to that as I'm the one doing this and lift myself up and disparage others, then that's problematic. So
do you have you talked about that flavor of letting go. Like, what does that look like for you? How do you, before we move on to the other questions, how do you actually work with the aggregates in terms of letting go in a kind of a practical way or something like that?
Yeah, well, I hadn't thought of this till just right now, but I do feel a particular type of tension in my forehead, which is, it's rather attached. It's a rather tense feeling in my forehead. And this is just a metaphor, but that's what attachment feels like. It's a tensing up. Samadhana is when I just relax. Okay, the muscles in the forehead, the muscles in the body, actively relaxing, bring attention to it, and then relax. Whereas anupadana, for me, it's like actually bring attention to the back of the head. It's something totally different. No longer so projecting into the future, projecting me into my surroundings, but just back of the head, behind the body, space. It's not even, it's not a problem. There's no tension. It's a totally different way of looking at experience. So
you talked a good deal about how to expand into consciousness, and that was useful in that same kind of expanding motion. So
yeah, doing it through the body or through visual sense or through hearing door. So should we go into some of the questions and we can maybe come back?
Yeah,
People
and
can hear us.
just to apologize, we are trying a new program now, and it seems to be a bit in and out of audio. So I might be fiddling around trying to fix that, but we'll upload a high quality recording after this. So just be patient with us. But this is a Q&A session, so feel free to type questions into the chat, and we will get to them, even if it's just us that can actually hear our answers. But we'll begin with this pile of questions, Ajahn. So, Ajahns, any further thoughts on cosmology shaping Buddhist beliefs, especially regarding rebirth ideas? I think where I go with this is there was a tendency, or is a tendency, in culture so grounded in dry materialism to dismiss rebirth as later historical interpolation, it's kind of historical baggage that the Buddha didn't actually teach but brought in later, or used perhaps just because it was kind of prevalent in the culture. And I'd say that how I'd kind of address this question is, for me, it indicates like, why is this part of the handful of leaves that the Buddha taught? You know, the Buddha said to the monks, many of you know this sutta, what is more, the handful of leaves here, or all the leaves in the sal grove around me? And the monk said, Lord, the leaves in your hand are few, those in the sal grove are many. And he said, even so, monks, that which I have experienced by direct knowledge is like all the leaves in the sal grove. That which I teach is just the leaves in my hand, suffering, dukkha, and the end of suffering, dukkha. So you hear something like a belief in rebirth and wonder, why did the Buddha place such emphasis in it? And he really did. Of the three tevijja, the insight knowledges at the night of his awakening, two of them had to do with rebirth. One was a recollection of his own rebirths, and then the second was a vision of other beings, karma, leading them to new birth. And then the third was the ending of the asava effluence. And, you know, you can interpret rebirth in a day-to-day way, but I think it was something the Buddha taught as a literal truth as well. And I think the reason he considered it essential or useful is it really opens and broadens your perspective on the situation we're in, the full catastrophe, as I think it's Pema Chodron says, in the sense of, it's one thing to understand our situation as a fraught existence from childhood to death of 80, 90 years, if we're lucky. And it's a whole nother to understand that this human rebirth is one moment among kind of infinite regression. The Buddha said samsara is without a discernible beginning. And it's an extremely good rebirth, which is unbelievably fortunate. And the sense of dispassion and disenchantment with the pleasures of the world and the turning towards a spiritual trajectory with that vision is potent. And I find it really does make a difference to me to hold that view. But, you know, the Buddha was clear that I don't have direct experience of rebirth or my past lives. And it's more something one can hold as a working hypothesis. There's a lot of 1 year to live clubs to see, like, how would you change your life if you just 1 year to live? And I think Ajahn Tanisara has suggested, 1 year of really believing rebirth. How would that shift your life? And I find it is meaningful. So, would you add anything to that, Ajahn?
No, I actually don't understand the question. But fortunately, there's an extra question, which is different-ish topic. Do you have anything to add to what you
No,
already
but our
said?
audio seems to be back good.
Great.
So go us.
Great.
Okay.
Any Buddhist psychology and or Buddhist chaplain programs that you know of and are able to share? There are a number of Buddhist chaplaincy programs. The one that I've known several people who've taken is through the Sati Center for Buddhist Studies in Redwood City, California. And it used to be that you had to come down in person at least once a month, and that may have changed, but it's a year-long chaplaincy training started by Gil Fronsdale and a few other Dharma leaders in the Bay Area. But Gil Fronsdale is a really, really nice, great person. And our teacher, Ajahn Pasano, really praises him as a teacher.
And I believe when you were discombobulated as a youth, you got a walk with Gil Fronsdale and were inspired by it. So we have him partly to praise for your current state.
That's right. I never did the chaplaincy training program with him, but I've known a number of people who have and said it was really life transformative. So that's where I would say to check. Do you know of any others? Okay.
Just Upaya, I believe, has one with Roshi Joan Halifax in the Southwest. So that's a very prominent one, I think. Ajahns, could you speak a bit more about the jhanas? What are they, and how do we know if we are experiencing them?
So the jhanas jhana is usually translated as meditative absorption or meditative immersion. And there are lots of different schools of thought and schools of practice which appear to define jhana differently. There's, say, the Pa'ak school of interpretation of the jhanas, which really goes back to Buddhaghosa. He's a commentator on the Pali Canon, the main commentator of Theravada Buddhism, who has a very strict interpretation of what jhana is, an extremely, extremely deep state of immersion and absorption. And the Pa'ak system of thought takes that framework as their model. And other teachers, Lee Brasington, we've interviewed him. He has a different interpretation. Ajahn Nisabho has another interpretation. Different teachers will define what are basically, so I'll mostly just go into the first jhana, what that is, and leave if you wanted to talk about the others. But the first jhana is described very simply. So it's quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. One enters and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by directed thought and evaluation, and the joy and rapture, or the piti and sukha, that are born from seclusion. So each of those words are quite potent, and look and see if you're experiencing any of them. So this is an experience which is secluded from sensual pleasures. So if you have your eyes closed and you're not thinking about sights or sounds, smells, tastes, or touch, then you're secluded to some degree from sensuality. The measure for what that means is, again, different in different schools. Secluded from unwholesome states, the 5 hindrances. Are you secluded, and have you abandoned, in the moment at least, greed, flavors of ill will, flavors of sloth and torpor, anxiety and doubt? Is there a measure of directed thought and evaluation, i.e., are you staying with your meditation object, and are you doing it in a non-rote way? Are you actually paying attention to the result? And is there some degree of piti and sukha, joy and pleasure? And is the mind unified around that? So, different factors. And we can read these in books, and the earliest formulations, these are so basic. It's such a skeleton outline that what we really have to do is you can check with your teacher, but also just checking your own experience and have a possible Ajahn Jeff, in a great essay called Jhana Not by the Numbers, suggests having sticky notes where, okay, this seems like I'm experiencing a level of joy or piti. That, okay, working hypothesis, this is joy, this is rapture, this is pleasure, this is directed thought, this is evaluation. And we will be wrong. We're increasing and learning about this. So watching yourself, seeing how you increase in these or how they change over time, and checking with teachers. So
we have a question from chat, so we'll alternate those from the retreat with live questions as well, just to keep things kind of engaged. The less one talks, the less karma that's created. This is a teaching that this questioner heard from an Ajahn to Nisabho Ajahn Jeff talk. Granted, we still create karma with our thoughts and actions, but on a mathematical scale, if we can speak less, then we can create less karma? ? But speaking of Dhamma, that would be good karma that is made but still creating karma. Basically, I'm curious how much karma is made with speech. Ajahn, do you want to address this? I can give a stab at it at some point too. So,
yeah. So, it's definitely not necessarily the case that always that the less one talks, the less karma that's created. I mean, you can be fuming while not talking, or active, like passive aggressively vibing someone, which you're actually using silence as a weapon in that case, in which there's quite a lot of karma being created. But there's also the truth of this, that if there is some like afflictive emotion, greed or anger, and there's a strong desire to speak from it, that just speaking, saying something into the world, so translating from thought impulse to speech into the world, just it's more karma in the sense of there's more chance, because if you're speaking, chances are there's someone you're speaking to, and there's more chance for a negative feedback loop to occur, especially if you're speaking from greed or anger. So it's more liable to lead to spinning off and more dukkha, because any degree of mental karma, which is based in greed and anger, delusion, is going to lead to dukkha, and all the more if you speak it out loud, because it takes some degree of, it's like a thought comes up and it has to reach a certain threshold before it comes out of the lips. And so yeah, Ajahn, do you want to add to that?
I think that was quite good, actually. Yeah.
Okay. All right. This next question from the retreat. I am a new practitioner, so please forgive the newbie questions. 1. During long sits, it's my shoulders and upper back that offer pain. Are there postural corrections, or is this to be expected?
I think pain is to be expected at first with sitting. You do want to adjust posture as much as you can, and people do, including me, struggle to keep the upright posture as much as we should. So I'd say making sure you have a good cushion, and really paying attention to that throughout the sit, like checking in, are you upright? If sitting on a cushion isn't working for you, the meditation Zen style bench can be helpful. And if both of those are continually a problem for some reason or another, a chair is okay, though often less desirable. And if you are in a chair, trying to keep your back away from the backrest, at least for some of the time, so that it truly is upright and mindful. One other useful tool is, often there's a kind of cord of tendon. I'm not physician, but this is something monastics and practitioners encounter often. Is there seems to be a cord of tendon that does run up alongside the hip and down the knee, and sort of affects this whole back point of tension. So if you do hip openers like pigeon pose, that can be really helpful. Additionally, using trigger points, there's these small kind of tennis balls or something like that you can buy, and you just sort of roll it on your hip or roll your hip on it. And I know a lot of monastics that use that to address that kind of particularly problematic point of tension. That being said, you can expect to feel pain when you begin to sit. And there's a few ways of dealing with that. One is to every now and again really push yourself. So you can learn a lot from pain. Ajahn Nisabho compares it to if you want to take a photo of all the animals on the savannah, you can drive around and chase them all down, and it takes a lot of energy. Or you can stand by the watering hole with your camera and just take pictures of all of them as they come. And pain is the watering hole. So many of our habits and negotiations and patterns come to pain. So there's a lot to be learned if you sit long every now and again to push through that and see that it can dissolve, and it's not yours, and it changes. It's not just pain. Often it's throbbing or pulsing, and it will shift and it'll move. But you don't want to do that all the time, because then you will hate to meditate. And so I think most of the time it is okay to, if something is really beginning to give you some trouble, to moving is okay, but to not make a habit of moving on first impulse, but to let the impulse come, let that first wave fall, and then maybe even a second wave fall, and then if it rises again, mindfully move. But just don't get into the habit of autopilot with moving to get past pain. That would be my thought, I think.
Nice.
Do you have anything, Ajahn?
Nope, but there is a second question here. I've read a lot of good secondary sources on Buddhism, Pema Chodron, Thich Nhat Hanh, etc. What primary text should I turn to first?
This is your wheelhouse, Ajahn. Would you like to address that?
Well, you should get the Dhammapada. You can find many editions of it online for free. It's 423 verses, which you could read in an hour and study for the rest of your life, and probably many future lives as well. You can also pick the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses of the Buddha, translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi, which Ajahn Nisabho and I are going through sutta by sutta, discourse by discourse. It's 152 discourses, and we're doing one a week every Sunday evening. So you can go onto our website and look up Mission Majjhima, and we do a YouTube video that's 10 minutes long, and you can find all those on YouTube. So yeah, middle-length discourses of the Buddha and Dhammapada.
We need to turn that part off. So, I mean, would you mind? We can read this guy, I think. Would you explain the intent behind the fifth precept? A friend was wondering if it applied if they didn't get intoxicated. Yeah, this is a question that comes up, and in the Theravada monastic tradition, we do tend to advise holding it. We do advise holding it as intoxicants completely off the table. And it is a fascinating question, because, yeah, if you're drinking one glass of wine, what's really the issue? And I'd say my answer to that has been, I'd answer that in a few ways. One is that if you really consider the Buddha's picture of the scope of samsara and the preciousness of a human rebirth, where we have this faculty of mindfulness, it's so rare that to have that is unbelievably precious and sacred. And so the idea that you would compromise that at all is like a bit anathema, or it's not appropriate. The second is the idea that, even if, I remember as a child, if my dad had one glass of beer, he keeps the 5 precepts now, but if my dad had one glass of beer, like, I really noticed. And as a child, you notice when your parent has one drink, like, it changes them. The third is that if it's just, maybe you can stop at one drink, but many people cannot. And so if you are um, having, if you're in a society where everyone is always drinking, it's just part of the milieu. And to have a few people who are holding that standard of not, of abstaining completely is worth a lot. Because it's a great act of compassion to those who might not have the self-control you have. And the final is just that, for me, the fifth precept is like the white surrender flag, where we can negotiate around why we're holding this and what we're doing and how much we're giving to the Buddha. But for me, that fifth precept is really that sense of like, okay, it's just a glass of wine. Like, if it really is just a glass of wine, then it's just a glass of wine. Give it up. And for me, there's a sense of like surrender. And even though I think it's a very small thing in terms of it is just one glass of wine, but that act of surrender or not is like very significant, I think. So yeah, I'd say that. Can I ask you one, Ajahn, or?
Sure.
Okay. Is it possible for an unpleasant vedana to always be unpleasant and stay unpleasant? Just thinking, perhaps the craving and dukkha that arises just softens with mindfulness. Reactions diminish, but that sense contact stays unpleasant, i.e. snoring.
Is it possible for an unpleasant feeling to always be unpleasant and stay unpleasant? No, it's not possible for any feeling to stay the same. A pleasant feeling is not going to stay pleasant forever. An unpleasant feeling is not going to stay unpleasant forever. A neutral feeling is not going to stay neutral forever. There's a great incisive quote from a bhikkhuni named Dhammadina in the canon, where she notes that unpleasant feeling, so pain or dukkha is dukkha, unpleasant feeling is unpleasant when it persists, and it's sukha, it's pleasant when it goes away. That pleasant feeling, sukha, is sukha when it stays and dukkha when it goes, and that neither pleasant nor unpleasant, i.e. neutral feeling, is dukkha when it is not known, but it's sukha when it's known, which is fascinating. It really does point to, this is something to look out for, is when Bhante Analayo says, and I do believe it works out via the Abhidhamma, but that when there is mindfulness, there is also some degree of piti, or pleasant mental sensation, that's happening when you have mindfulness. So a very interesting observation, and see if that's true in your experience, and also see if you can transform your neutral or your most boring feelings into something which is not boring at all, because really boring is just a lack of creativity. So yeah, but that sense contact stays unpleasant, i.e. snoring. Do you have any insights into snoring? We sleep in different huts, so
it's true. I mean, perception does change, and perception affects the vedana as well over time. There is a feedback loop. So we were just talking about cold plunges this morning with some people on Alms Round, and cold water initially is terrible, but if you do cold plunges, they're helpful for meditation. I recommend them. Don't know how many people actually take me up on that, but they begin to be actually a pleasant experience. And there's also just really skillful perceptions you can apply this to in daily life as well. Ajahn Jayasaro was mentioning, if you have a relative with dementia who tells that same story again and again, just that shift in perception of kind of thinking of it like you're chanting with them. Oh, like this one again. I love this one. And it's the same story, the same kind of what would lead to unpleasant vedana based on a perception of like, oh, they're going on about this again, to, okay, this is a nice thing I can do with someone whose mind is, has faded a bit. And it's a good story, it's like chanting together. And so I think a big part of Dhamma practice is skillfully changing those perceptions. And Han Shan, a Zen master, said, after time, all of practice becomes pleasant, because when things are pleasant, they're pleasant. And when they're painful, it's a chance to use their Dharma strength, which is pleasant. So I think we'll have to take more of these questions, because we are running out of time and we have many of these to go through.
Okay. My question is about practicing with children. As a mom of young children, I see how their sense of self is coming together, and how that at this stage could be contradictory or hard. At the same time, they are also sponges of goodness and care. Does the Theravada tradition make any reference to this?
Is he? Sorry. I would say that two things. One is, when the Buddha taught his son Rahula, it's interesting, when you look at the suttas with Rahula, the Buddha's son, it's the only place in the canon you get to see the Buddha's specific instructions to one individual over the course of a whole life, and kind of the graduated teaching that develops. And his first teaching to Rahula is on honesty, the importance of honesty, and the importance of being observant about your own actions and their harm or benefit. And that's such a simple but beautiful framework to give a child. And the Buddha said in other places, give me a person who is sincere and honest, and I will train them. So that grounding, I think, is a powerful thing to articulate, and putting their self on firm footing in that sense. But because we do have to develop a healthy sense of self, even in Buddhist practice. And then also, we were talking with Gregory Kramer recently, and he was speaking about how with his children, he would every night kind of read a bedtime story to them, or even make one up or something, which was fun for him. And then they would do loving kindness meditation, and that sponginess of goodness, really honoring that by the Brahma Viharas are a powerful practice, and you can give that to your children. And then finally, I heard about someone recently who would have their child meditate, and they drop an M&M in a bowl every minute they did it. So smart. We haven't done that with each other yet, but it's a interesting strategy. So
yeah.
Anything to add to that, Ajahn?
No, I like the M&Ms. No, okay.
Considering the first precept around not taking another life, I'm curious how this belief interacts with abortion, death with dignity, and suicide. It seems compassion is tied up in these as well.
All right, we got 4 minutes. Let's see. Abortion, death with dignity, suicide. Okay. Let's see. Okay, 3 minutes now. Okay, 1 minute for each. The Buddha said that what is karma? It sounds really mystical, but karma is intention. Karma is intention. So all of these, basically all of our volitional acts are based on intention, and that includes all of anything that might be classed under the first precept about intentionally taking the life of another living creature. It's not an offense if it's not intentional. So if I accidentally, waved my hand over here, just gesturing, and killed Ajahn Nisabho, then it wouldn't be an offense. But yeah, death with dignity. That's all of these. We're not going to have enough time. Compassion. The thing is that, there can be mixed motives in going into something, and that does have an effect on the karmic result. But Ajahn, do you have anything to summarize there?
We can always circle back and zoom, but to say, these are such complicated topics in terms of how they manifest in people's lives. And I'm sure a lot of people on this stream have had relatives who've taken their life, died by suicide, who have had abortions, and who have probably in recent years death with dignity or legally assisted suicide, depending on the languaging, has become more common. And I suspect people here have had relatives who've had that. I have. What we can say is, from a Buddhist perspective, intention and motivation, the intention to kill is unwholesome, regardless of the motivation, even if the motivation is compassion. And how people, so it would be death with dignity would be against the first precept, as would suicide, as would abortion in the Buddhist framework. That being said, people will navigate this, and some will choose to take on karma. And these are really complex issues in people's lives in terms of how they manifest. And we want to acknowledge that. To speak at any more kind of detail about it would, I think, require more context and more than literally no minutes, which we're at the end of the live stream. But the the framework of the Buddhist teaching does make clear that the taking of a life in these contexts is leaves a scar in the heart at some level, and is a karmic act. That being said, as we noted, we know many people who have navigated these waters and are navigating them, and we wish only compassion and wisdom for those who are doing so. And people will navigate them based on many conditions and decisions. How'd I do, Ajahn?
I give us about a C-.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry,
right.
people.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you all for your patience with a somewhat choppy live stream as we figured out the audio and this new format. We do have 2 more questions, or maybe 3, but we will maybe address these in the Zoom session, which we're going to jump over to now. For those just joining us, we generally have a Zoom session from 6:45 to 7:30 p.m. Pacific time. I'm going to paste the link into the chat right now. If you don't see it, go to clearmountainmonastery.org, and halfway down the page, you'll see a Wednesday evening live stream event listing, and you can join us on Zoom there, and it's just a chance for more intimate discussion. Ajahn Kovilo and I will be going on winter retreat for the next 3 months, but we will still be on these live streams. We really enjoy them, and they're actually quite nourishing. But we're just wishing everyone here a depth of practice these coming months. Ajahn Kovilo will be hosting 7 hours of meditation on Zoom a day, so you can check that out. That's a lot of hours, people.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to talk. It's just quiet.
That's right.
And next week, we are planning on airing an interview we did with Longpo Vajiro, a wonderful senior monastic of the Thai Forest tradition and a disciple of Longpo Cha. So,
all right. Thanks, Ajahn.
Ajahn.